Okafor. This codicil is dated October 14th, 3 weeks before your grandmother passed. And it removes your name from the $187,000 primary bequest and transfers it, in full, to your sister, Adiz. Patrick Drummond's voice was careful, the tone of someone delivering news he had decided in advance not to apologize for. The conference table at Drummond and Kess Law was long enough that Vivienne could have fit 3 more chairs on her side of it alone. Dark wood. Water glasses nobody had touched. The morning light coming through the windows making everything look like something from a deposition video. My dark coat was still on. I hadn't taken it off because some part of me had been waiting the entire drive from the cemetery to be told something that would require me to stand up and leave immediately. And I was right. The codicil lay on the table in front of me. 3 pages. Handwritten. Magnolia embossed at the header. The kind of stationery my grandmother's birthday cards arrived on. The kind Grandma's handwriting looked like. But I was looking at the signature now, the one at the bottom of page 3, and something in it was throwing a switch in my spine that my brain had not yet caught up to. The stroke of the final L in Hartwell was going down and to the left, the pressure flat where it should have been looping upward. Where it had been looping upward on every card she had ever sent me, every check she had ever signed, every grocery list in her handwriting I had seen stuck to her refrigerator with a magnet from the school where she had taught for 41 years. I had Sunday visits with her, every single Sunday for 11 years, without exception. And I had watched her handwriting change over that time. Getting shakier, yes. The letters smaller. Her arthritis documentation from September noted stage 3 in both hands. But the signature's rightward tilt, that upward final stroke, that was the thing that had stayed constant. I kept looking at that signature, and something in my body was running a parallel analysis my conscious mind had not authorized. The knowledge was sitting in my chest like cold water. The instrument was presented to the notary on record as being executed by your grandmother, Patrick continued, opening a second folder, this one thinner, with a single logged entry, notary fee $75. Dated October 14th. It was notarized by Ronald Tate on that date. The document was presented to my office by your mother on November 12th, 8 days after your grandmother's passing, during the initial estate document submission. I heard the word presented, the way an accountant hears a number that doesn't reconcile. Presented by my mother. Not discovered among Cornelia's papers, not found in Cornelia's safe deposit box, presented, as in carried in, as in brought to this table on purpose. The stakes were sitting on top of me now, and they had weight. 18 months ago, Cornelia had been discharged from the hospital following a stroke, and the rehabilitation facility was private. 8 weeks of intensive physical therapy in a place you had to pay for out of pocket or through insurance that covered almost nothing. I had co-signed the medical debt because Cornelia couldn't qualify on her own and because she was going to pay it back. We had made that agreement specific and clear. I would sign the note. She would retire and use the inheritance she had already inherited to cover it. And I would use my own inheritance, the $187,000 that was already earmarked for me in the will Cornelia had drafted in 2015, to retire my portion early and reset my own savings. The debt was $43,000. The payment plan matured in 90 days from today. The day after I had buried my grandmother, without the bequest. I did not have the liquidity to pay it. Without the bequest, the creditor could come after my wages. The math was simple, and the timeline was not negotiable. The funeral had been yesterday. I was sitting in a law office 36 hours later, listening to my mother's handwriting on my grandmother's personal stationery, tell a court officer that she wanted my sister, Adaiza, who did event planning and had never asked for a cent from this family, to have the money. Instead, is Adaiza contesting the earlier will? I asked Patrick. Has she filed anything? No, he said. Your sister is not contesting the original will. She is receiving the primary bequest, as named in the codicil. Your mother filed the codicil with me on November 12th and has attested that your grandmother executed it voluntarily. There is no contest that I'm aware of. There is no contest, as if contestation was the only thing that could make this real. As if it wasn't already real, sitting on the table in my dead grandmother's handwriting, signed by someone whose signature I didn't recognize. Who else was present when the codicil was executed? I asked. I would need to speak with the notary about that. Patrick said, my office was not present. The instrument was executed outside this office and brought to me for entry into the record. The notary would be the only external witness to the execution. I picked up the codicil and looked at it again. 3 pages. Dense handwriting, feminine, careful, but not careful in the way Cornelius careful was. Her later handwriting had that tremor, that slight irregularity I get when you're managing pain in your hands. This was careful in the way penmanship is careful. This was someone copying something they had studied. This was someone who knew what Cornelia's handwriting looked like and had sat down to do it right, to make it match, the way you might match a person's voice if you had heard it enough times. I turned to page 2 and then page 3 again, staring at that signature. The leftward slope contradicted everything. Everything. I'll need to retain an attorney to review this, I said. Patrick nodded as if I'd just said something sensible and inevitable. That's your right, he said. The estate will remain open pending any formal challenge. But I should tell you that from an operational standpoint, if no challenge is filed within 60 days of the probate date, the court will move to close, and any subsequent contest becomes substantially more complicated. 60 days? I did the math in my head while Patrick was still talking. Probate date was 14 days from now. 60 days after that would be late August. The debt matured in 90 days from today. Unclear if I filed a challenge that pushed past 60 days. The debt matured while the estate was still contested. And then Grace's second weapon got activated. You can't touch any of the estate funds while the primary bequest is under dispute. So I couldn't even withdraw my portion of what remained. I would have 90 days to find $43,000 out of a savings account that had $1,200 in it. And no reasonable timeline on when the dispute would settle. Grace had thought about this. Grace had known exactly when this conversation would happen and what math would be sitting in front of me afterward. That was what patience looked like when it was pointed at you with intention. As Patrick was finishing his explanation of the probate timeline, his paralegal, a woman in her late 20s with glasses and a name tag that said Morgan, appeared in the doorway with a fresh water pitcher. she refilled the glasses nobody was drinking from. And as she was leaving, she paused beside my chair and pressed something into my hand. A business card. Her fingers were warm and her voice was low. Dr. Cecilia Voss. Question documents. Just in case you have questions about the instrument. And then she was gone. And I was sitting there with Patrick's voice explaining the next steps. My hand closed around a business card with a phone number on it, and the knowledge in my chest that my mother had walked into my grandmother's house, with her arthritis at stage 3, with her cognitive decline documented weekly by her palliative care team, with her trust in her daughter's judgment already 9 years deep, and had asked her to sign something, or maybe had told her to sign something, or maybe had handed her a pen and shown her a line, the way you do when you have decided that the clarity of consent is less important than the efficiency of agreement. I folded up the codicil and put it in my coat pocket. The drive from Drummond and Kesslaw to my apartment took 40 minutes. I didn't drive during that time. I sat in the parking garage where I had left my car, in the dark between 2 concrete walls, with my dark coat on and the funeral program still folded in my lap, the kind they print with a photo of the deceased on the front and her obituary on the back. All of it already starting to feel like the thing that happened before the real thing started. I could see the notary's fee in my mind. $75, logged the afternoon of October 14th. I could see my mother sitting beside Cornelia. 9 years of managing her household finances and her signatures. Knowing where her stationery was kept, and knowing that she had ordered it in bulk for Cornelia's 81st birthday, because it was the kind of practical gesture my mother understood as a form of affection. I could see the moment the notary asked Cornelia directly whether she understood what she was signing. And I already knew, that something in that moment had decided whether I was going to spend the next 11 weeks in a legal fight or accept the fact that my mother had been precise and patient and had asked my grandmother for permission to steal from me the way you asked for a glass of water from the kitchen. The funeral program was getting soft from my hands. I opened my eyes. The parking garage was still empty. The business card with Dr. Cecilia Voss's phone number was still in my coat pocket, pressed there by a paralegal who had decided that Patrick Drummond's careful language was not careful enough. That something about the signature on that codicil was wrong the same way I had felt it was wrong. Not as an analytical conclusion, but as a body knowledge, the kind you have to act on even when your rational mind hasn't finished its sentence. I started the car and drove home. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to give us more motivation to develop it. Thank you very much. Also, please comment where you're watching our videos. New York or Texas? We're very curious. The birthday card is still in my nightstand drawer. Cornelia wrote it in April, 6 months before she died. And her handwriting is shaky. Yes, but unmistakably hers. The cursive leans right, the way her handwriting always did, and the final L in Hartwell loops upward with a quirk that appears in every document she ever signed. I have kept this card beside my bed for reasons I didn't understand, until the moment I saw the codicil's signature slope in the opposite direction entirely. Written by someone who had studied Cornelia's letters, but missed the angle that lived in her hand. But this is what comes after. Before the codicil, before the law office, before the 90-day deadline, there was what Cornelia built. And I need you to understand what that was before I tell you how it was taken. Every Sunday for 11 years. I drove to Cornelia's house. Not most Sundays, every single Sunday. Winter Sundays when the temperature dropped and the roads were bad. When I would leave my apartment at 30:30 to allow time for traffic. Oh, my hands tight on the steering wheel. Sundays when I had work backed up or friends waiting or a man I was trying to make time for. Every Sunday at 4:00, without exception. Because Cornelia had built a life where that time belonged to me. And she never broke it. She lived in the house she had paid off alone. A 3-bedroom with good bones and a front porch where she sat sometimes in the summer with a glass of something cold. The kitchen was where she had invested her attention. Pale granite counters. Small white subway tiles on the backsplash. Stainless steel appliances that she kept immaculate. The kind of kitchen that told you someone had thought carefully about how to spend the years they had left. She had paid that house off in 1997. I know this because I am a CPA and numbers are how I know things. And she did it on a public school teacher's salary over 41 years of work. 41 years of standing in front of other people's children, 5th grade primarily, teaching them reading and mathematics, and how to sit still and listen to someone other than their mother. 41 years of staying past 3:00 to help a student who didn't understand fractions. 41 years of buying school supplies out of her own paycheck because the district budget was thin. 41 years of building other people's children piece by piece. And when that was done, she owned something that nobody could take away from her. She had retired in 2008, and by then the house was hers completely. No mortgage, no debt. Just a woman in her 60s with a pension and a modest savings account, and a house that was paid for. Oh, which meant she had the kind of freedom most people never get. She could choose what happened next. She could choose how to spend her remaining time and her remaining money. She could sit on her front porch in the summer and watch the neighbors' kids ride their bikes without feeling like she owed anybody anything. And she chose me every Sunday, 4:00. She knew I would be there, and she planned for it. She would make something. Biscuits that came out hot from the oven, the butter melting into the layers, or a pot of the cassava leaf soup her mother had taught her to make during a visit back home to Trinidad, when Cornelia was already in her 60s and hungry to remember where she came from. Sometimes just sandwiches if the week had been tired. The house would smell like her intentions when I walked through the door. And that was how I knew she had been thinking about me all week. One Sunday in February, maybe 6 years into the ritual, I arrived to find Cornelia sitting at the kitchen table with her bills spread out in front of her. Bank statements, insurance documents, tax forms, all of it organized into neat stacks. She had just finished paying them. She told me she liked to do it the old way, writing checks, watching the numbers leave the account so she knew exactly where her money was going. I like to know, she said. I like to see it happen. She was 65 years old. Her hand was steady. Her mind was clear. She showed me her filing system, alphabetized by vendor, going back 15 years. She showed me her savings account balance. Not an enormous amount, but enough, carefully tended over decades. This is mine, she said, not boastfully, but factually. I earned every penny of it, and it's mine. My mother, Grace, had started helping with Cornelia's bills around 2015. Cornelia was in her late 70s by then, and Grace had decided that the financial management was too much. At least, that is what Grace said. Grace would come by on Wednesdays and organise the filing cabinet and pay the bills online and make sure the checkbook was balanced. "You shouldn't have to worry about this at your age," Grace would say, which was a kind thing to say, and also a reframing of what Cornelia had never said she worried about. Big Grace had a way of suggesting that what you had been doing competently all along was actually a burden you could finally shed. It was helpful. It was the kind of thing a good daughter does. And I understood that because I was the kind of person who understood daughters helping mothers. And I didn't think too much about the fact that Cornelia had been managing her own bills quite competently for the previous 50 years, or that the shift toward helping happened around the same time Grace retired and suddenly had space in her days that needed filling. 9 years. Grace had access to Cornelia's files for 9 years. She knew where the stationery was kept. Cornelia had ordered a new box in bulk for her 81st birthday. Magnolia embossed with her name, which was the kind of thing Grace noticed. Grace has the kind of mind that catalogues details about other people's lives. Which notary Cornelia preferred, which attorney handled her legal matters, which bank held her accounts. Grace became fluent in Cornelia's financial signature, the way you become fluent in a language you speak every day. She knew it so well that she could have written it, or at least tried to, for 9 years. Grace paid the bills on time. For 9 years. Grace organised the files so efficiently that Cornelia could have found anything in seconds if she wanted to. For 9 years. Grace was the good daughter, the reliable daughter, the one who handled the details. And for 9 years, Cornelia slowly lost the capacity to verify what was being done in her name. Not because she was incapable, but because she trusted her daughter to handle the details. And trust is what destroys you when it is placed in the wrong hands. I remember a Sunday when Cornelia asked me to help her balance her checkbook. This was maybe 2 years into Grace's management, and she was confused by the transactions. There were deposits she didn't remember, or rather, she remembered them, but not the amounts. And there were checks she had never written, but there was Grace's explanation on the stub. Utility bill, property tax, insurance. "Your mother handles all of that now," Cornelia said, not unhappily, but with a kind of relief that worried me. She was relieved to not have to think about it. She had earned the right to stop thinking about money. And she took it. And she handed it all to Grace. 8 weeks before Cornelia died. We had our last completely lucid conversation. She had been declining for months. The arthritis in her hands had progressed to stage 3, documented by her physician. And the cognitive decline was evident too. The slight confusion about dates, the repetition of stories she had told me 100 times before. But that afternoon, she was sitting up in the rehabilitation facility bed, and the morphine was regular, and her body was failing, but her mind, in that moment, was present and clear, as it had ever been. I was in the chair beside her, the kind of institutional plastic chair that folds and has no dignity, and she looked at me with the same exact look she had given me every Sunday for 11 years. Like I was someone worth looking at. Like seeing me mattered. And she said, "Everything I have is already yours, baby. Well, your mother just doesn't know it yet." I thought it was the morphine talking. That was my mistake, and it was a mistake so fundamental that it would cost me later. I thought the drugs had loosened something, and she was having a thought that belonged to her pharmacy. Not her will. I said, "Grandma, save your energy," which was patronizing and also loving. The way you speak to dying people, the way you try to protect them from themselves. But she repeated it, more firmly this time. "Everything I have is already yours. I already told Patrick. It's already written down. Patrick Drummond, the estate attorney." "I made sure," she said, "before my hands got bad, before I couldn't think straight anymore, I made sure it was documented. You understand?" I said I understood, but I didn't. Not really. I believed she believed it. I didn't understand that she was telling me something factual, that she had already done the thing, that she had sat down with Patrick Drummond with her hand still capable of signing her name clearly and given him instructions in writing, that she had made sure it was documented and sealed, and waiting for the moment someone would challenge the other version. I thought she was saying goodbye. I thought she was dying and trying to comfort me with the promise of a future that mattered to her. And so I held her hand. It was so light by then, like holding a bird made of paper, and I let her believe I understood. And I went home that night, and I cried because my grandmother was leaving me. But she wasn't leaving me. She was telling me the truth. She was trying to make sure that even after she couldn't speak, even after she couldn't defend her own decisions, the words would still be there. The documentation would still be there. I just didn't hear it yet. The birthday card sits in my nightstand drawer. And the signature loops upward at the final L. And every time I look at it, I see the woman who paid off a house on a teacher's pension, Mouse, who built 41 years of other people's children into citizens and readers and people who could do fractions, who gave me 11 years of Sundays without fail, who knew exactly what she had and who she wanted to have it, and who was careful enough to make sure the words would survive her voice. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to give us more motivation to develop it. Thank you very much! Also, please comment where you're watching our videos. New York or Texas? We're very curious. The codicil reading was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, 5 days after the funeral. I had taken the afternoon off from Hartwell and Bridges, the first time in 7 years I had done that without advance warning. And I sat in traffic for 20 minutes, thinking about what Patrick Drummond had told me on the phone that morning. The document was straightforward. The notarization was in order. There was a matter that needed to be discussed. Straightforward. That was the word that made me understand something was wrong before I walked into the building. Patrick Drummond's office was on the 14th floor of a building that had probably been elegant in the 90s and was now just beige. Beige carpeting, beige walls, the kind of corporate mid-range that makes time feel neutral and decisions feel inevitable. The conference room had a long table, dark wood, and Patrick was already seated when I arrived. A folder open in front of him, his coffee cooling in a ceramic mug with a company logo I couldn't read from where I was standing. Grace was sitting across from where I would sit. And she had arranged her face into something I had never seen her wear before. A kind of composed sorrow, the expression of someone who had anticipated this exact moment and decided in advance how she would look when it arrived. Her hands were folded on the table, her shoulders were slightly back, Every visible part of her was communicating a narrative. I am sad about this, but I am not surprised by it, and I am prepared for your reaction to it. She had rehearsed. That was what I understood. Looking at her. She had stood in front of a mirror, or she had sat in her car in the parking lot, and she had practiced this expression until it became the thing she would wear to tell her daughter that her daughter was not getting what her grandmother had promised. I pulled out the chair and sat down between them, and the positioning suddenly felt obvious. The table becoming a document of relationship, the three of us arranged at its edges like a contract waiting to be signed. Patrick opened the folder, and the codicil was there in front of me. 3 pages of handwritten text on Cornelia's personal stationery. The magnolia embossed version at the header. The one she had ordered in bulk years ago when Grace had decided she was helping manage the household details. The handwriting sat in front of me, dense and careful, feminine in the way Cornelia's was. And something in my body registered the wrongness of it before my conscious mind had time to articulate why. My chest tightened like a belt being cinched. The knowledge was already there in the way my hands went cold. But it was in my body, not yet translated into words. I didn't speak yet. I watched Patrick's hands as he arranged the pages in front of me, watching him move like someone performing a ritual he had performed before. His movements were economical, practiced. He had done this, presented bad news in a measured way. Let the document speak for itself. Waited for the response he knew was coming. This codicil, Patrick said, his voice taking on the tone of someone reading language he had already prepared, was executed on October 14th, 3 weeks before your grandmother's passing on November 4th. It is handwritten and notarized by Ronald Tate, a mobile notary public. The document is dated, signed, and witnessed according to state statute for a valid codicil to an existing will. He waited for me to nod or to object. I did neither. I was looking at the signature on page 3, the final L in Hartwell, watching how it sloped downward instead of looping upward, watching the pressure of the pen go flat instead of maintaining the angle that had looped upward on every card Cornelia had ever sent me, every check she had ever signed, every grocery list in her handwriting I had seen stuck to her refrigerator. Everything in the signature was going the wrong direction, and I could feel the wrongness of it like a physical thing sitting in my chest. The codicil states, in your grandmother's words. Patrick continued, opening to the second page and reading aloud, that she wishes to amend her will, dated 2015 to redirect the primary bequest previously designated to Vivian Okafor in the amount of $187,000. That amount represents the sum total of her liquid assets and home equity less outstanding medical obligations. The codicil further states that she wishes to place this amount into a new primary bequest to Adais Okafor, with no conditions or restrictions attached to the distribution. $187,000, the exact number I had been calculating for years, the number I knew down to the decimal point because I was a CPA, and because my grandmother had told me explicitly and repeatedly that everything she had was already mine. The number that meant my grandmother had known exactly what she was leaving me, had considered it carefully, had decided it was enough to cover the $43,000 that was co-signed and coming due in 68 days. and enough beyond that to reset my own account, to retire some of my own debt, to finally have the margin that you build over 41 years of teaching and managing and saying no to yourself. The signature appears to be your grandmother's, Patrick said, and it was notarized by Ronald Tate on that same date. I have the notarization record, Ray. He opened a second folder, thinner, with a single logged entry. Notary fee $75, dated October 14th, 3:15 in the afternoon. Is this document in my grandmother's handwriting? I asked. Patrick set his pen down. A deliberate movement. A small pause that told me he had anticipated this question and prepared an answer that would tell me nothing. He had been an estate attorney for longer than I had been a CPA. He knew what I was asking. He knew what I was seeing in the signature. He had chosen, already, not to acknowledge it. It was presented as such, he said, and notarized by a licensed notary of record. Ronald Tate is registered with the state, maintains a bond, and his notarial seal appears on the document. I have no reason to question the authenticity of his work. Presented as such, not signed by her, not written by her. Presented, the word choice was precise, and Patrick knew it was precise, and I knew that he knew. Who presented it to you? I asked. Your mother brought it to my office on November 12th, 8 days following your grandmother's passing, during the initial estate document submission. She stated that your grandmother had executed it with her full knowledge and understanding, and that it represented your grandmother's final wishes regarding the disposition of her estate. I looked at Grace. Her expression had not changed. Her hands were still folded exactly where they had been. But I saw something then. I saw the way her index finger was pressing down slightly harder on the back of her other hand, the only visible sign that she was present in her own body, that she was not actually the composed inevitability she was pretending to be. Her breathing had become shallow. Her neck had developed a small flush, creeping up from her collarbone. These were the details I had learned to see, watching her all my life. The micro-movements that happened when she was trying to contain something. Did you speak to my grandmother directly about this document before it was notarized? I asked Patrick. No, he said. My office was not present at the notarization. According to the notary record, the instrument was executed outside this office. Did my grandmother call you? Did she email you? Did she ever, in any conversation, express to you that she wished to change her will after 2015? Patrick looked at his papers. His silence was an answer. We have not had a conversation since 2015, he said. When your grandmother originally retained this firm, she gave general instructions on estate planning, and we drafted the initial will at that time. The document was updated in 2015 per your grandmother's instruction. We have not corresponded since that time. So the first time you knew about this change was when my mother brought this codicil to your office 8 days after Cornelia died. That is correct! And you didn't find that unusual? Wills can change, Patrick said. Priorities shift. It's not uncommon for a person to update their testamentary intent in their final years. In the final 3 weeks? I asked, when the person you just described had documented cognitive decline and documented arthritis in both hands, when she couldn't sign a birthday card without tremor and somehow she managed to write 3 pages of handwriting that's steadier than anything she produced in the last decade of her life. Patrick didn't answer immediately. He looked at the codicil, at the handwriting, at the signature that was the wrong slant, and the wrong pressure, and the wrong everything. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, and that quietness told me he had heard what I was saying, and that he had decided already not to help me with what I was beginning to understand. "If you have concerns about the document's authenticity," he said, "you would need to raise those through a formal challenge to the probate court. I can advise you that if no challenge is filed within 60 days of the probate date, the court will move to close the estate, and any subsequent contest becomes substantially more complicated." 60 days. I did the math in my head while Patrick was still speaking. Probate date would be 14 days from now. 60 days after that would be late August. The debt matured in 90 days from today. If I filed a challenge that pushed past 60 days, the debt matured while the estate was still contested. And then Grace's second weapon got activated. You can't touch any of the estate funds while the primary bequest is under dispute. I would have 90 days to find $43,000 out of a savings account that had $1,200 in it, and no reasonable timeline on when the dispute would settle. That was what Grace had constructed. That was the cage she had built. Not just taking the money, but taking it in a way that made defending myself economically impossible. "Where is it, Daisy?" I asked. The question seemed to surprise Grace. She shifted slightly in her chair. A small movement. But the first break in her composure. "She didn't feel she needed to be here," Grace said. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. "This is straightforward. The document is clear. Your grandmother made her choices, and we have to respect those choices." Straightforward again. We have to respect those choices? Adais has never missed a family event in her life, I said. She has never missed a birthday, a funeral, a holiday. She showed up to your retirement party at 2 a.m. to help serve the food. She's been at every Sunday dinner, every hospital visit, every function that mattered to this family. Without fail, she did not attend the funeral. She is not attending the reading of her own inheritance. When was the last time that happened? Grace's jaw tightened slightly. It was a small thing, but I was watching for small things now. I was beginning to understand that the conversation I needed to pay attention to wasn't the one happening out loud. The real conversation was the one written in signatures and timing and absences. "She's busy," Grace said. "She's working on a business venture. She's focused on her own life. She didn't need to be here for this." "For what?" I asked. "For the formality of inheriting her own money? Or for something else? For watching me find out? For being present while my mother explained why my grandmother's will changed 3 weeks before she died?" "There's nothing to explain," Grace said. "Your mother knew what she was doing. She made her own choices." Your mother? She had just said it, had named exactly what had happened, and then had told me there was nothing to resist. As if the intent of a dead woman was something that could be asserted by the living and left unquestioned. "I would like to see the original document," I said to Patrick, "and I would like the contact information for the notary." "Of course," he said. "I can provide you with those, and I want to advise you, if you're considering challenging the instrument, you should move quickly. The probate deadline is firm." "I understand," I said. The rest of the meeting moved quickly. Patrick provided me with copies of everything. The codicil, the notary certification, the list of the estate's assets. I took the papers, folded them in half, placed them in my bag. My hands were steady. That surprised me. My hands were completely steady. As I was leaving, Morgan, the paralegal who had given me the business card at my first visit, appeared in the doorway. She had a manila envelope in her hands, but what she pressed into my hand as I was putting on my coat was something else. Another business card. The same card she had given me before. But this time, the gesture felt different. Felt intentional in a way that went beyond professional courtesy. Her fingers were warm against my palm. "Dr. Cecilia Voss," I read, "questioned documents. Just in case you have questions about the instrument." Morgan said quietly, "Just in case you want a second opinion." She held my eye for 1 second longer than necessary. And then I was walking toward the elevator. And Grace was still sitting at the conference table in her composed sorrow. And my grandmother's redirected inheritance was already becoming something I would have to fight for. Something I would have to prove didn't belong to my sister. Something my mother had been patient enough and careful enough to take away from me. I pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. I stepped inside, and as they closed behind me, I saw my reflection in the polished stainless steel. A woman in a dark coat with a business card in her hand and 60 days to decide what she was going to do about the fact that her mother had walked into her grandmother's life and written herself into her grandmother's will, using her grandmother's stationery and her grandmother's hand, or something close enough that one attorney had decided not to look too carefully. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to give us more motivation to develop it. Thank you very much. Also, please comment where you're watching our videos. New York or Texas? We're very curious. I got home that Tuesday evening and didn't turn on the overhead lights. I moved through my apartment in the dark, hanging my coat on the chair by the door, setting my bag on the kitchen counter. Onichimim, my movements the kind you make when you're operating on muscle memory, and your conscious mind is somewhere else entirely. I opened the kitchen drawer where I keep things that matter. Tax returns going back 7 years. My grandmother's will from 2015, a copy of the deed to her house, and I took out the birthday card. The envelope was still there too, the postmark from April visible on the front. I left it where it was. The card itself was small, the size of a note card, with a painting of peonies on the front. White flowers, cream-coloured background. The kind of thing you buy at a museum gift shop because it's beautiful, but not trendy. Inside, in Cornelia's handwriting, was a message. For my brilliant girl. Keep shining. Love, Grandma. 6 words. That was all she had energy for by April. The handwriting was shaky. Arthritis. The decline that had been setting in for years. But unmistakably hers. Right-leaning cursive. The final L in Hartwell looped upward with a quirk. A specific gesture that appeared in every document she ever signed. I had seen that signature on tax forms, on checks, on the deed to her house, on legal documents dating back decades. It was as identifiable as her voice. I set the card on the kitchen counter and then went to the bedroom closet, where I had placed my coat earlier that afternoon. My hands were shaking as I searched the pockets, But I found what I was looking for. A business card with a name embossed in simple sans serif font. Dr. Cecilia Voss. Question documents. Below that, a phone number and an address. Morgan had pressed it into my hand as I was leaving Patrick Drummond's office, and I had placed it in my coat pocket without looking at it, without thinking about what it meant. But I knew what it meant. I knew why Morgan, who worked for Patrick Drummond, who was supposed to be managing the estate, according to the codicil, had given me the card of a document examiner. She had seen what I was beginning to see. She had noticed something in that signature that had made her take the risk of helping me, of signalling to me that there was someone who could verify what my eyes were already telling me. I didn't call Dr. Voss that night. Instead, I went back to the kitchen and pulled out the packet that Patrick Drummond's office had prepared for me. A manila folder containing copies of the codicil, the notary certification, the letter from my mother dated November 12th. I had read through them once, briefly, on the drive home from the office, my vision narrowing with each page. Now I opened to page 3, the page with the signature, and placed it on the counter beside the birthday card. I pulled the desk lamp from my study, a small brass lamp with a warm bulb, the kind I use for reading financial statements, and set it on the kitchen counter, angling the light down onto both documents. The kitchen was quiet. My apartment always felt too quiet at night. No hum of traffic from my window, no sound of other people's lives moving through adjacent walls. Just the sound of my own breathing and the small click of the lamp switch as I turned it on. I stood there for a long time without moving. The 2 documents sat on the counter under the light, and my brain was moving very slowly through what I was seeing, as if understanding was a thing that had to happen at its own pace, as if rushing the recognition would somehow make it untrue. The signature on the birthday card sloped to the right. The letters were upright, the pressure consistent despite the tremor of arthritis visible in the slight wavering of some of the strokes. And the final L in Hartwell looped upward with that specific gesture, the pen lifting at the end of the letter, the stroke rising up and to the right before terminating in the characteristic hook. It was the handwriting of someone whose right hand was shaking from pain and age, but whose mind knew exactly how it wanted the letters to form. I had seen that hook 1,000 times. I had watched her sign checks. I had watched her sign the deed to her house. I had watched her hand make that upward gesture automatically, the way a hand does when it has been making the same gesture for 60 years. The signature on the codicil sloped to the left. The letters were perfect. No tremor, no hesitation, no evidence of arthritis or weakness. The final L in Hartwell went down and to the left. Flat, the exact opposite of the upward loop that had appeared on every document my grandmother ever signed. Not just occasionally, not once, every single time. The pen pressure was uniform in a way that a hand with stage 3 arthritis in both joints could never manage. The baseline was absolutely straight, the kind of straight that comes from someone who is conscious of creating perfect letters, who is paying attention to precision, rather than allowing muscle memory to guide the hand. Someone had studied Cornelia's signature. That was clear. The letters themselves were recognizable. Anyone who knew my grandmother's handwriting would look at that signature and think it was hers. The general flow was there. The shape of the letters, the size, Someone had sat down with a pen and paper and had practiced writing those letters, had worked on getting the angle and the flow as close as possible to what they had studied in documents they had access to. But they had missed something essential. They had gotten the letters right, and the pressure right, and the overall shape right. But they had missed the specific gesture, the rightward lean of the entire signature, the upward terminal stroke on the final L. The thing that lives so deeply in muscle memory that it's almost impossible to fake because it's not a conscious choice. It's an automatic gesture, the kind your hand makes without thinking about it. My hands began to shake. Not my mind. My mind was clear, was moving through the evidence with the precision of a CPA who reads documents for a living, who understands what detail means, who has spent 18 years learning to spot inconsistency in financial records and contractual language. But my body knew something before my conscious mind had finished articulating it. My hands knew that what I was looking at was proof, not speculation, not suspicion, proof. I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery where I had photographed other documents over the years. A check Cornelia had written in 2019 for a property tax bill. A birthday card from 2020 with the same Love Grandma closure. A handwritten note from a hospital visit in 2022 when she was already declining, but still insisted on writing to thank the nurses. I placed them on the counter one by one, creating a timeline of signatures going backward in time. The rightward lean was consistent across all of them. The upward terminal stroke on the final L was consistent. In the more recent documents, the tremor was visible, arthritis showing up as slight wavering in the strokes, the pen pressure becoming less uniform as her hands weakened. But the gesture remained. The muscle memory remained. The specific way her hand moved remained. The codicil signature was none of these things. It was a forgery written by someone who knew Cornelia well enough to have access to her stationery and her previous signatures, but not well enough to know the deepest habits. The ones that live in muscle memory, in the specific gesture a hand makes without thinking about it. Those are the gestures that are hardest to fake. Those are the ones that reveal the truth when everything else has been carefully managed. I had a copy of the codicil in front of me, but I understood now that what I needed was the original document itself. The actual pen and ink, the actual pressure marks, the actual evidence of how it was written. A photocopy could hide details. A photocopy could smooth out inconsistencies, could blur the subtleties that distinguish genuine writing from careful forgery. But the original would tell the story of the hand that held the pen. The original would show the pressure, the angle, the micro movements that no forger, however careful, could replicate perfectly. I thought about the October 14th date on the codicil. 3 weeks before my grandmother died. October to November. During a period when she was declining, the rehabilitation facility had documented that her cognitive function was compromised, that she was experiencing confusion about dates and times, that her capacity to understand complex documents was diminished. The same facility had documented the arthritis in both her hands. Stage 3. Meaning severe pain and limited range of motion, 3 weeks before she was unable to defend what had been written in her name. 3 weeks before death made the defense permanent. I thought about my mother visiting the rehabilitation facility every day during that period. My mother, who had access to Cornelia's personal stationery, the magnolia embossed kind that she had ordered in bulk years ago. My mother, who had known Cornelia's signature for her entire life, had grown up watching her sign documents, had studied it for 9 years while managing her household finances. My mother, who had been patient enough and careful enough to wait for the moment when Cornelia was weak enough that a document brought to her with "This is just a formality, Mama," or "The lawyer needs your signature on something," would be signed without scrutiny. My mother, who understood the probate timeline well enough to know that 8 days after a funeral, after the shock and the grief and the logistics of death, a document could be presented to the estate attorney and entered into the record before anyone had time to question it. My hands were still shaking. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with the document spread in front of me. And I read through the codicil again, reading it the way I would read a client's financial statement, looking for what else might be wrong. What other inconsistencies might reveal themselves under scrutiny? The handwriting itself was dense and careful, the kind of careful that comes from someone copying something they had studied. Someone who is conscious of every letter, or someone who is not allowing their hand to work from automatic memory, but from conscious intention. The language was Cornelia's in structure, but generic in content. My grandmother would have been specific if she were really changing her will. She would have explained why. She would have said something about days, would have articulated some reasoning that would have made sense of the change. My grandmother was not a woman who made major decisions without explanation. She was not a woman who would redirect $187,000 to her granddaughter and leave it without comment, without context, without the specific detail that would have been necessary to justify such a significant change. But there was no explanation. There was just the redirection, just the signature, just the thing that looked like my grandmother's hand, but wasn't. I went back to the coat pocket where I had placed the business card, and I read it again. Dr. Cecilia Voss. Question documents. The card was heavy stock, cream-coloured, with an address in the financial district, and a phone number with the area code for the county. There was the specific expertise that could prove what my hands already knew. That the signature on the codicil was not written by my grandmother. That someone had forged her name on a legal document. That the theft of my inheritance was not something my grandmother had chosen, but something that had been done to her, in her name, by someone who knew her well enough to study her handwriting, and not well enough to know that the deepest truths about a person's hand cannot be faked. They can be approximated, they can be copied, but they cannot be replicated perfectly, because they emerge from a lifetime of automatic gesture, from muscle memory that has been building since childhood. I placed the card on the counter beside the documents and sat looking at it for a long time. This was the moment where everything became possible. This was the moment where I had something besides my own certainty. Something besides the cold knowledge that had moved through my chest and the shaking of my hands. This was the moment where the proof shifted from being trapped in my body, in the knowledge that lived in my fingers, in my professional understanding of detail, and became something that could be extracted, examined, made into evidence that would stand up in a courtroom if it came to that. I picked up my phone and looked at the time. 11:47 at night. Too late to call, but I made a note of the number. I set the business card on my nightstand where I would see it first thing in the morning, and I sat in my quiet apartment with the documents spread around me, and I understood. For the first time since Patrick Drummond had opened that folder 5 days ago, that I was not helpless. I was not trapped. I had a signature analysis expert's phone number in my hand, and I had evidence that could be examined, and I had 18 years of experience reading documents for inconsistency. What my mother had not counted on was that her daughter was a CPA. What my mother had not considered was that the very skill she had watched me build, the ability to read detail, to spot inconsistency, to understand what documents reveal when you know how to look, would be the thing that proved her guilt. I picked up the birthday card one more time and looked at that upward loop on the final L of Hartwell. That small gesture, that unconscious habit, that proof of my grandmother's hand, and I knew that everything that came next, the call to Dr. Voss, the forensic examination, the legal challenge, the confrontation with my mother, all of it would flow from this moment. All of it would flow from the simple act of placing 2 documents under a lamp and with my mother. All of it would flow from this moment. All of it would flow from the simple act of placing 2 documents under a lamp and looking carefully at what my grandmother's hand had been trying to tell me all along. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to give us more motivation to develop it. Thank you very much. Also, please comment where you're watching our videos. New York or Texas? We're very curious. Rosa Delgado's office was in a 3-story building in the financial district. The kind of place where the carpeting is high quality, but not fancy. Where the waiting room has leather chairs and magazines from the current month. Where you know immediately that the attorney takes herself seriously, but doesn't need to prove it. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted me by name, which meant Rosa had told her I was coming, which meant Rosa was taking this seriously. I had found her through a paralegal I knew from a tax audit 3 years ago. Someone who had mentioned her in the context of a custody dispute. Rosa does family law, custody fights, asset division, anything where someone is trying to hide what they own or claim what they shouldn't. She doesn't let people get away with anything. Rosa was waiting for me when I arrived at 3 o'clock on Friday. She was in her early 40s, Hispanic, with grey threaded through her dark hair, and the kind of posture that tells you she has spent years sitting across from people and not believing half of what they say. She wore a navy blazer over a cream-coloured blouse, and gold bracelets that clicked together when she made notes on her legal pad. She gestured me into her office without any of the preliminary warmth that people usually offer. No, how are you? No, can I get you coffee? Just the direct signal that she wanted the facts, and that my time was going to be valued. "Tell me what you have," she said, and so I did. I laid out everything. The birthday card from April with Cornelia's authentic signature. The photocopy of the codicil with the signature that sloped the wrong direction. The forensic analysis I had done myself with the desk lamp and the documents spread on my kitchen counter. I explained the signature inconsistencies in detail. The rightward slant versus the leftward slant. The upward loop on the authentic L in Hartwell versus the flat terminus on the codicil signature. The consistent pressure that indicated a hand without arthritis pain. I explained the timeline. October 14th. 3 weeks before death. and in during a period when my grandmother's cognitive function was documented by the rehabilitation facility as compromised, when her arthritis was documented as stage 3 in both hands, when her capacity to understand and consent to complex documents was diminished. I explained my mother's access. 9 years of managing Cornelia's finances. 9 years of knowing where the stationery was kept. Knowing the notary's name. Knowing every detail of my grandmother's life. I explained her opportunity. Presence at the rehabilitation facility every single day during that 3-week period. Access to my grandmother at moments when she was medicated. Confused. In pain. Vulnerable. I explained her motive. The $200,000 estate. The primary bequest that had been earmarked for me. The granddaughter who was not her favourite. Not her legacy project. Not the person she had decided deserved to inherit. Rosa listened without interrupting. She made notes on her pad, the bracelets clicking softly each time her pen moved. When I finished, she set the pen down and looked at me. "And you have a document examiner?" she asked. "Dr. Cecilia Voss," I said. "Questioned documents." "She was recommended to me." "Have you retained her?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, to understand what the process would be, what it would cost, whether this is something that can actually be proven in a courtroom." Rosa leaned back in her chair. "To file a challenge to the codicil, we need to establish fraud or undue influence. The signature analysis is good. That's the kind of evidence a court will listen to. But we need it done properly. Chain of custody, formal examination, expert testimony that can stand up to cross-examination. Are you prepared for that? Because it's going to cost money, and it's going to take time, and your mother is going to fight you. She's going to hire her own expert and try to undermine yours. She's going to argue that your grandmother's handwriting changed with age and medication. She's going to claim that the signature variations are natural. She's going to do whatever she needs to do to protect what she's already taken." "How much money?" I asked. "For my representation, I charge $5,000 as a retainer, then hourly after that at $250 per hour. Figure 30 to 50 hours total if this settles without going to trial. If it goes to trial, that number doubles, maybe triples. Doctor, Voss will charge you for the examination itself. That's probably 3,000 to 4,000, depending on how much work she needs to do. Plus testimony fees if she has to appear in court. You're looking at 8,000 to 10,000 minimum if we settle. 15 to 20 if this goes to trial. $8,000 to $10,000? Maybe more. I had $2,200 in savings. That was not $8,000 to $10,000. That was $1/4 of $8,000 to $10,000. That was the problem I had not yet solved. "How much do I lose if I don't do this?" Rosa asked. She was watching me, watching my face, calculating something. "The bequest amount? $187,000, I said. "And you co-signed a medical debt of $43,000 that matures in how long?" 68 days from now. 90 days from the funeral date. Rosa set down her pen. She looked at me the way a person looks at you when they are calculating something that involves your entire future, when they are running the numbers and understanding exactly how trapped you are. "You don't have a choice," she said finally. "You spend 8,000 to 10,000 now, or you spend 43,000 in 2 months. and lose the inheritance anyway, because it will be tied up in probate forever. Your mother knows this. She structured this to make it impossible for you to fight back financially. What we need is speed. We move fast. We file the challenge before the probate closes. We force Drummond to produce the original document before he can certify the codicil. And we get Dr. Voss in front of the court with her analysis before your mother can mount a real defense. How much can you access right now? 5,000, I said. Maybe 6 if I liquidate some investments. Do it, Rosa said. Give me 5,000 today. We file the preservation letter on Monday. We get the document into Dr. Voss's hands by Wednesday, and we have her report back to us by Friday. We move fast enough, and your mother won't have time to panic. She'll have to respond to the fraud allegation before she's figured out what her defense is. I transferred $5,000 from my savings account to Rosa's trust account on my phone while sitting in her office. The transaction took 6 seconds. My account balance changed from $7,200 to $2,200. I watched the number change on the screen, and then I set the phone down and asked Rosa what came next. I send a preservation letter to Patrick Drummond, she said. I cite potential fraud. I require that he produce the original codicil under formal chain of custody conditions, that he preserve all documents related to its execution and entry into the record, and that he acknowledge receipt of the letter and the preservation order. This forces him to understand that a challenge is coming. It forces him to stop pretending this is just a straightforward estate administration. It makes him understand that he has liability if he doesn't cooperate.
Will he do it?
I asked. He'll do it because if he doesn't and we prove fraud later, his malpractice insurance is going to have a conversation with him about why he didn't cooperate with an attorney's request to preserve evidence. Estate attorneys understand liability. They understand professional responsibility. He'll produce the document because the alternative is far worse. Rosa's paralegal typed up the preservation letter while I was still sitting there. I watched it being printed, watched Rosa sign it, watched it being placed in an envelope and prepared for courier delivery. The language was precise and formal, the citations accurate, the threat of fraud implicit in every sentence. The letter stated that evidence of forgery had been identified, that the signature on the codicil was inconsistent with authenticated samples of the decedent's handwriting, that the estate attorney had a responsibility to preserve the instrument under conditions that would allow for expert examination and potential legal action. The letter was delivered to Patrick Drummond's office on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. I knew because Rosa called me as soon as she got the courier confirmation. "It's done," she said. "Now we wait for his response." He responded by Tuesday afternoon. Not with a call to Rosa or a meeting to discuss the implications. Just the document. Delivered by courier in a sealed envelope, with a chain of custody form signed and dated by Patrick Drummond himself and his paralegal Morgan. The form documented every moment of the original codicil's handling. From the day it had been received in his office through its preservation and delivery to Dr. Voss. No one could later argue that the document had been tampered with, that the evidence had been compromised, that the chain of custody had been broken. The original codicil arrived at Dr. Cecilia Voss's office on Wednesday morning. I did not open the envelope myself. I did not touch the document. The whole point was that the instrument would be handled under conditions that no one could later argue with. The chain preserved, the integrity maintained, the evidence unimpeachable. Doctor. Voss examined it for 3 hours while I waited in her office, her drinking coffee that had gone cold sometime around the hour mark, reading articles on my phone about document forensics and signature analysis, about the differences between authentic aging tremor and practiced imitation, about how experts testified in courtrooms and what juries believed. Doctor. Voss's office was cool and quiet. There was a single window looking out onto the financial district, the buildings visible in the distance, the ordinary world going about its ordinary business, while I sat in a leather chair and waited for someone to confirm what my hands already knew. When Dr. Voss emerged from her examination room, she was carrying a file folder thick with notes and photographs. She was a woman in her late 40s, white, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the kind of calm that comes from spending years examining things other people have lied about. She sat down across from me and opened the file without preamble. The signature on the codicil is not authentic, she said. I can state that with confidence. The characteristics are inconsistent with the authenticated comparator samples you provided. The checks, the cards, the personal documents. There are several indicators, and they all point in the same direction. First, the baseline. Your grandmother's authentic signature has a rightward slant, approximately 18 to 20 degrees from vertical. This is consistent across all of your samples. The codicil signature has a leftward slant of approximately 22 degrees from vertical. That's a 40-degree deviation. That's not natural variation. That's a different hand. She opened the file and showed me enlargements of both signatures side by side. Cornelia's authentic signature looping upward with the characteristic gesture on the final AL, and the codicil signature sloping down and to the left with a flat terminus. The differences were stark when magnified. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. One was authentically written by someone with 60 years of automatic gesture behind it. One was practiced imitation. Second, the pen pressure. Doctor, Voss continued. Your grandmother's later documents show evidence of essential tremor. You can see it here, here, and here. She pointed to 3 separate authentic signatures where the pressure varied, so the tremor was visible in the inconsistency of the stroke. The pressure varies because she's managing pain in her hands while she writes, but the codicil signature is uniform throughout. The pressure is consistent from beginning to end. That indicates a writer with full motor control, someone without hand pain, someone without tremor, someone who is conscious of creating perfect letters rather than allowing their hand to work from 60 years of automatic muscle memory. How long would it take to practice a signature enough to do this? I asked. A few hours. Doctor, Voss said. Maybe a day. If you have samples to work from, which someone would need, to get the letters right, you could sit down and practice until you got it consistent enough to pass casual inspection. But you couldn't get the muscle memory of a lifetime. You couldn't replicate the specific gestures that come from automatic habit, from the unconscious decisions a hand makes when it's been writing the same signature since childhood. Those are the things that reveal authenticity. Those are the details that a forger can study but can never fully replicate. She had prepared a written report, formal and detailed and devastating, 12 pages. Photographs at various magnifications. Measurements. Expert conclusions. The language was technical, but clear. The signature on the codicil was a practiced imitation produced by a different hand under controlled conditions. Not Cornelia's tremor. Not Cornelia's angle. Not Cornelia's ink pressure. Not Cornelia's hand. I signed for the document and paid Dr. Voss the balance of her examination fee with a credit card that still had available credit. $3,200. The transaction went through. My available credit dropped by that amount. I was now $8,200 in debt with a savings account that held $2,200 and a medical debt that was coming due in 61 days. I drove home in silence. I did not turn on the radio. I did not make any phone calls. I drove through the city with both hands on the steering wheel and my eyes on the road, and my mind moving through the implications of what Dr. Voss had just confirmed. The signature was forged. My mother had forged my grandmother's signature on a legal document. My mother had walked into a rehabilitation facility and had presented a document to a notary and had watched as her own mother signed something that my mother had written, or had written herself, and brought to the notary with Cornelia present, but confused. Cornelia's cognitive decline, making her unable to object to what was in front of her. What was being placed in her hand? I pulled into a gas station 10 miles from my apartment. The pump was the kind where you have to go inside to pay, and I got out of my car and walked into the fluorescent brightness of the station. The coffee in the dispenser by the register looked like it had been sitting for hours. But I filled a cup anyway and stood in line behind a man buying lottery tickets. The fluorescent lights made everything look slightly sick. The smell of gasoline and hot coffee and the particular staleness of a place where thousands of people pass through every day without stopping long enough to notice anything. The woman at the register was in her 60s, with a name tag that said Linda in faded plastic letters, and she didn't ask me if I needed anything else. She just rang up the coffee, $2.47, and I paid with a card and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 6 minutes with the engine off and the coffee cooling in my hand. I did not turn on the radio. I did not check my phone. I just sat there, in the quiet of my own car, in the parking lot of an ordinary gas station on an ordinary afternoon, and I understood exactly what I had done. I had hired an attorney. I had paid for expert testimony. I had triggered a legal response that would force my mother to either explain how my grandmother's signature had ended up on a document she didn't write, or to defend herself against the accusation of fraud. I had $8,000 in debt and 61 days before a creditor could start coming after my wages. I had a signature analysis that proved my mother was a thief, but I did not have the money to guarantee that I would win. I had done the only thing I could do, which was to spend money I did not have on evidence that I hoped would be enough. I started the car and drove the rest of the way home. My apartment was cold when I got there. I turned on the heat and sat on the couch with the coffee that had gone lukewarm. And I pulled up my banking app and looked at the number. $2,200. That was what I had left. That was the margin between solvency and catastrophe. That was the cost of proving that my mother was a liar. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to give us more motivation to develop it. Thank you very much. Also, please comment where you're watching our videos. New York or Texas? We're very curious. Grace arrived at my apartment building on a Wednesday evening, and I knew something had shifted because she never showed up unannounced. She called first, she texted, she gave notice, she understood boundaries, or at least she understood the appearance of boundaries. But that Wednesday, she was at my door with a covered dish in her hands. Something wrapped in foil, still warm, the smell of her kitchen following her inside like a shadow. Cornelia's cassava leaf soup. Probably. The recipe that belonged to our family. That was supposed to belong to me now. That my grandmother had taught her to make during a trip back to Trinidad 40 years ago. The gesture was supposed to mean something about connection and care. About mother and daughter and the bonds that transcended argument. I hung up my coat and turned around. And before I had even finished the movement, before I had set down my bag or turned on the lights, Grace set the dish on my counter and slid a manila envelope across my kitchen table. "I wanted you to see this," she said. Her voice was calm, composed, the voice of someone who had decided in advance how calm she would be, how unruffled, how reasonable. She pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. She did not remove her blazer. She did not settle in. This was going to be brief. Inside the envelope was a 2-page document, an affidavit, typed in a standard font, printed on legal-weight paper, notarized at the bottom with an official seal. Adiz Okafer's signature at the bottom of the page. I recognized it immediately because I had seen it on birthday cards. On thank you notes, on the small documents that mark a family's ordinary life. The affidavit stated, in formal legal language that someone had paid to have drafted, that Adaze Okafor was declaring under penalty of perjury that Cornelia Hartwell had, on multiple occasions over the past several years, expressed her wish that Adaze receive the primary share of her estate. Because Adaz needed a foundation, those were the exact words. Not wanted, not would benefit from, needed, as if needing was the category that determined inheritance. As if my grandmother had sorted her granddaughters by their desperation and decided to distribute her life's work accordingly. The affidavit went on to state that Cornelia had spoken these wishes at various times and in various contexts. At family dinners, at the hospital, during visits to her house. No specific dates, no specific conversations. Just the assertion that Cornelia had wanted this, had said so, had communicated her wishes clearly enough that Adaz was prepared to swear to it under penalty of perjury. I set the affidavit down on the table. I did not read past the first page. I did not need to. "Where did you get Adaz to sign this?" I asked. She wanted to help. Grace said, she understood what needed to happen. She's not happy about this situation either. But she understood that your mother's wishes needed to be honored. My mother, not Cornelia. She had just named exactly who the wishes belonged to. Did Adaz know that you forged Cornelia's signature on a legal document? Grace set her hands on the table. She did not answer immediately. She let the silence sit between us for long enough that I understood she was deciding how to lie. What version of events would be most effective? "I didn't forge anything," she said finally. "Your grandmother wrote that codicil herself. I was there. I witnessed it." "In whose presence? Patrick Drummond's? The notary's?" The notary was there. Ronald Tate? He's a licensed notary. He verified that your grandmother signed the document of her own volition. After 3 weeks of cognitive decline. I said, after she was medicated, or after she was in pain, after you had been sitting with her every single day, managing her accounts, knowing what her signature looked like, having access to her stationery. Your grandmother had the right to change her mind about who received her money, Grace said. And she did. She made a choice. I supported that choice. I pushed the affidavit across the table toward her. I did not want to touch it anymore. The paper felt contaminated, like holding something that had been through someone else's hands with the intention to deceive. There's something else, Grace said. She reached into her purse and withdrew another document. A letter. This one on Patrick Drummond's official letterhead. I did not reach for it. I just read it from across the table, my eyes moving down the page, my brain working to understand what I was seeing. Patrick Drummond had written to state that if I filed a formal challenge to the codicil under the current probate filing, the entire estate would be transferred to a court-appointed administrator. That meant extended probate. That meant the court would oversee the distribution of every asset. Not Patrick Drummond, not my mother, not me. That meant neither Adiz nor I would receive anything. Not the house, not the savings account, not the life insurance payout, not the $312,000 that represented my grandmother's entire life. Until the court ruled on the validity of the codicil and determined who was entitled to what. How long? I asked. I asked Patrick the same question, Grace said. He said probably 6 months to a year. Could be longer, depending on the court's calendar and how much your attorney wants to fight. Depends on whether your expert testimony holds up under cross-examination. Depends on whether the court finds your allegations of fraud convincing. 68 days. The debt matured in 68 days. If the probate extended to 6 months, if it extended to a year, then the creditor would come after my wages while my money was locked up in the court system. The debt would accrue interest. The creditor would file a judgment. My credit would be destroyed. My wages would be garnished. My financial future would be liquidated in the process of trying to reclaim what was already mine. And at the end of it, if I won, if the court agreed that the codicil was forged, if Dr. Voss's analysis was found convincing, I would receive the inheritance. But the cost would have been everything. The cost would have been the financial security I had built over 18 years. The cost would have been my ability to retire, to breathe, to exist without the weight of debt pressing down on me. That was what Grace was telling me. That was the real offer. Not back down and you get to keep your dignity, but fight and you will lose everything, even if you win. Patrick also mentioned, Grace continued, and her voice had not changed. It was still quiet, still composed, still the picture of maternal concern. That the forensic analysis you're pursuing probably won't be admissible anyway. The court will want to hear from the notary about the circumstances of execution. The court will want to know what your grandmother said, what her state of mind was, and your grandmother is dead. So it's really just my account of what she said against your speculation about whether she meant it. Grace pulled the letter back toward her and set it on top of the affidavit. She arranged the papers neatly, carefully, The way you would arrange evidence that you were sure would stand up to scrutiny. What she was saying was this: I have a notary who will say what I tell him to say. I have an affidavit from your sister. I have a letter from the estate attorney confirming that you're about to trigger a legal nightmare. I have Cornelia's own words. The words I will claim she spoke. The words only I was present to hear, to counterbalance whatever your expert can prove about the signature.
Did she write that codicil herself?
I asked. One question. That was all I needed. One direct answer would tell me whether my mother was lying, whether the signature was forged, whether what I had discovered with Doctor Voss was proof of a crime or proof of my own misunderstanding. Grace looked at me. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She looked back at me. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost sad, the voice of someone who had tried to explain something difficult to someone who refused to understand. Mama knew what she wanted. Vivienne, she said. I just helped to say it. That was not a denial. That was not a confession. That was something worse. It was a statement designed to sound like both at the same time, designed to leave me with nothing solid to argue against. Did she write it? She wrote it, but with help. Did she understand it? I made sure she understood. Did I forge it? I facilitated it. The language was perfect. It admitted nothing. It explained everything. It made it clear that my mother understood exactly how fragile the truth was. How easy it was to blur the line between what Cornelia wanted and what Grace had decided Cornelia should want. Grace picked up her purse. She did not stay for dinner. She did not ask me to try the soup. She did not say anything else. She just stood, and I stood with her, moving toward the door as if the evening were already over, as if everything had already been decided. I hope you'll make the right choice, Grace said at the door. I hope you'll think about what this will cost you. I'm your mother, Vivienne. I'm trying to help you see what the best path forward is. I did not respond. I opened the door and watched her leave, and I did not close it until I heard the elevator doors close down the hall. I went back to the kitchen table and sat down in the dark. I did not turn on the lights. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The display showed my savings account balance. $1,200. I was looking at the number, trying to think about what it meant, when my eyes moved to the line below it. My credit card balance, $8,200 in debt. Rosa's retainer, $5,000. Doctor. Voss's examination fee, $3,200. All of it spent. All of it gone. 68 days until the medical debt matured. 68 days to figure out how I was going to pay $43,000 that I did not have. That was coming due while my grandmother's inheritance was locked up in probate limbo. I pulled up Rosa's billing statement on my email. 30 hours already, at $250 per hour. $7,500 in attorney fees before we even got to trial. Before we even filed the formal challenge. Before the judge issued a single ruling. $7,500 plus $8,200 equals $15,700. $15,700 that I did not have. That would have to be charged to credit cards. That would accrue interest. That would follow me into whatever future I managed to build after this was over. I looked at the affidavit again. A Daisy's signature at the bottom. I had seen that signature on birthday cards that arrived every year, on thank you notes after I had given her gifts, on the rental agreement she had signed for her apartment 3 years ago. I knew the way she wrote the capital A in her name. A specific angle, a specific pressure, a specific gesture that had become automatic over time. The signature on the affidavit was genuine. Adeza had signed it. Adeza had agreed to swear under penalty of perjury that Cornelia had spoken these wishes. That was what made it so effective. That was what made it almost unbeatable in court. Because Dr. Voss could prove that the codicil signature was forged. Dr. Voss could show the pen pressure, the baseline angle, the muscle memory inconsistencies, the characteristics that did not match anything Cornelia had ever written. But Dr. Voss could not prove what was said in Cornelia's kitchen 2 years ago. Dr. Voss could not testify that my mother had not asked Cornelia, in a moment of clarity between the medications, whether she wanted to change her will. Dr. Voss could only prove that the signature was not written by the person whose name it bore. And against that, Grace had Adeza's affidavit. She had the notary's records. She had whatever words she would claim Cornelia had spoken. Words that only she had heard, that only she could testify to. She had a timeline that stretched past the point where I could survive financially. She had made it so that even the truth would be expensive enough to break me. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to give us more motivation to develop it. Thank you very much. Also, please comment where you're watching our videos, New York or Texas. We're very curious. Finding Ronald Tate took 3 evenings and a state notary registry database that required me to sit at my kitchen table with a glass of wine I was not supposed to be buying on my remaining credit. His name had been logged in the official records from October 14th. The afternoon Cornelia signed the codicil. But there was no office listed. No business address. Just a mobile notary designation and a phone number that had been disconnected 3 months ago. The registry gave me his full name, registration number, and a list of every appointment he had notarized in the past 5 years. Hundreds of them. Mortgage documents, power of attorney forms, affidavits, the ordinary business of people making things official. I ran searches on his name. I found a LinkedIn profile that had not been updated since 2019. I found a real estate website listing him as an agent from 2015 to 2017. I found a home address in the county assessor's database. I found nothing that told me whether he would remember a single appointment from 3 weeks into his past, or whether he would be willing to testify about it. But I had time. I had something that looked like urgency. I had a woman looking back at me from the surveillance footage of my own life. A woman who had just spent $8,200 on evidence that my mother had called inadmissible, that a court would never hear, because what mattered was not the signature, but what Cornelia had said. And only my mother had been present to hear that. Except Ronald Tate had been present. Ronald Tate had watched Cornelia sign the document. Ronald Tate was the person who had a legal obligation to verify that the signer understood what she was signing. Ronald Tate was the one person whose testimony could bridge the gap between what the signature proved and what my mother claimed Cornelia wanted. I called the number listed in the registry on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk at Hartwell and Bridges, pretending to work while my fingers shook slightly as I dialed. The phone rang 4 times. I was about to give up when someone answered. "Yeah," a man's voice said.
Is this Ronald Tate? Who's asking?
My name is Vivian Okafor. I'm calling about a notarization you performed on October 14th of this year. The document was a codicil to a will. The person signing was Cornelia Hartwell.
I heard breathing on the other end. I heard the sound of someone thinking, remembering, recognizing a moment they had filed away weeks ago and had not expected to hear about again.
I'm not going to discuss my client's business over the phone, he said finally. His voice was cautious, the voice of a man who had probably been in situations where what he said could be used against him.
That's a personal matter.
I'm not asking you to discuss it, I said. I'm asking you to participate in a deposition. I'm the granddaughter. My attorney is Rosa Delgado. We're challenging the validity of the codicil. I believe you may have witnessed something that's relevant to that challenge. Another pause. Longer this time. I'd need to talk to an attorney before I agree to anything, he said.
You should, I replied.
And you're a witness. You're not the defendant. You're not being accused of anything. We just need you to tell the truth about what you observed that afternoon. There was the weight of his hesitation, the sound of him calculating whether the easiest choice was to stay uninvolved, or whether his obligation as a notary, to witness accurately, meant something deeper. Okay, he said, but I want it done in an office. I want my attorney present if I get one. I want it formal.
Perfect, I said.
That's exactly what we want to. I hung up and called Rosa immediately. By Friday morning, she had sent Ronald Tate's attorney a deposition notice. By Tuesday afternoon, we were sitting in a conference room on the 4th floor of Delgado and Reed's office building, waiting for him to arrive. Rosa and I had spent the previous evening preparing. We had 3 pages of questions, starting with the simple ones and moving toward the moment that mattered. When had he notarized the document? What time of day? Who was present? What was his understanding of his role as notary? Had Cornelia Hartwell identified herself? Did she appear to be of sound mind? Did she appear to understand the legal nature of the document she was signing? The conference room was beige, the color of institutional neutrality, designed to make conversations feel official and weight-bearing. There was a long table, chairs on either side, a pitcher of water with lemon slices, the particular silence that comes from a room designed for people to tell important truths. Ronald Tate arrived at 2:00. He was a man in his 60s, white, with the weathered look of someone who spent time outdoors and who had learned long ago not to make friends with people he notarized documents for. His attorney, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, came with him. They reviewed the questions Rosa provided. A court reporter sat at a small desk in the corner, her hands already positioned over her steno machine. Rosa began with the basics. When did you notarize this document? October 14th of this year. What was your understanding of what the document contained? A codicil to an existing will. You are familiar with the term codicil? Yes. It's an amendment to a previously executed will. Did the woman signing the document identify herself? Yes, she stated her name. She was Cornelia Hartwell. Did she appear to understand what she was signing? Ronald Tate paused. It was not a long pause. It was maybe 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, I understood that this was the moment when a man decides whether to say what was convenient or to say what was true.
I asked her directly, he said. His voice was steadier now, more deliberate, as if speaking under oath had reminded him of his responsibility. I asked her whether she understood the document and whether she was signing of her own volition. That's standard procedure. And she looked at the woman sitting next to her before she answered me. The room became very still. She looked at the woman next to her, Rosa repeated, making sure the court reporter had it precisely. Before she answered your question? Yes. Before she answered, she looked to the side. She looked at the other woman in the room, the woman who had brought her there, and then she answered me. She said she understood, but she looked at the woman first. That other woman was my mother. That was the moment when everything I had spent $8,200 trying to prove crystallized into a single, observable fact. Cornelia, medicated and in pain, her hands too painful to hold a pen steady, her mind documented by the rehabilitation facility as compromised, had sought permission from her daughter before answering a notary's direct question about her own autonomy. That was undue influence. That was not consent. That was not an exercise of independent will. That was a woman whose judgment had been so thoroughly compromised by pain, medication, and her daughter's presence that she could not even tell a notary public that she understood a legal document without first checking with the person she was supposed to be making her own decision against. Rosa continued with the deposition for another 4 hours. She asked every question I had prepared during the long evenings in my kitchen. During the sleepless nights when I was trying to figure out how to survive the timeline my mother had constructed. She asked about Cornelia's demeanor. She asked about her speech. She asked whether Ronald Tate had observed any signs that Cornelia was confused or medicated. She asked whether it was standard practice for someone to look to another person for confirmation before answering a notary's question about their own understanding. It happens, Ronald Tate said carefully, but it's not ideal. When I ask someone whether they understand a document, I expect them to answer for themselves. If they look to someone else first, it makes me wonder whether they're actually making their own decision or whether someone else is making it for them. The transcript was filed that same afternoon. Rosa sent it to Patrick Drummond's office with a cover letter 6 pages long. A meticulously documented argument that the deposition established undue influence, that the codicil was void under the law, and that the estate must be returned to its original 2015 distribution. Grace's attorney called Rosa before 5 o'clock. "We would like to discuss a settlement," she said. No preamble, no negotiation, just the recognition that the case was over, that the evidence was too strong, that fighting would only cost more money for an outcome that was already decided. The settlement conference took place 4 days later in a mediator's office. A different building, a different room, the same kind of institutional beige. Patrick Drummond was there with files and papers, organized into neat stacks. Grace was there in a navy blazer, her hair done, looking composed in the way that people look composed when they have decided in advance how they will appear when they lose. Grace did not look at me when I sat down. She did not acknowledge my presence except as an obstacle, a problem that had somehow persisted longer than she had anticipated. Her attorney, a woman older than Rosa, with silver hair and the particular confidence of someone who has represented people with money to spend on legal problems, began by laying out her client's position. But it was already over.
We all knew it was already over. The mediator walked through the settlement terms, and they were exactly what Rosa had demanded. The codicil was void. The 2015 will was reinstated. The primary bequest of $187,000 reverted to my name. The house, the savings account, the life insurance payout. Everything went back to the original distribution. My medical debt would be paid from the estate. I would receive what my grandmother had promised me. Patrick Drummond opened a drawer in the conference room table. From it, he withdrew a sealed envelope. Cream-coloured, official-looking. My name, written on the outside, in handwriting I recognised immediately, even though I had not seen it in months. Vivian, in my grandmother's right-leaning cursive. Your grandmother left this with me in April of this year, Patrick said to the room. He was speaking to all of us, but he was looking at Grace. She instructed me to open it only in the event the will was formally contested. She was quite specific about that. She said if anyone challenged what she had written, I was to open this letter and read it aloud in front of the person who was challenging it. Patrick opened the envelope carefully. He unfolded a letter, handwritten on Cornelia's personal stationery, the magnolia embossed kind. The signature at the bottom looped upward on the final L of Hartwell. Exactly the way it had looked in the birthday card. Exactly the way it had looked on every document my grandmother had ever signed. Patrick read the letter aloud. Dear Vivian, if you are reading this, it means someone has challenged my will. I am writing this letter while my mind is clear and my hand is still steady enough to write. I want you to know that I made my choices with full knowledge of what I was doing. I was thinking clearly. I was not confused. And I want you to know that if someone has changed what I wrote, if someone has forged my signature or put words in my mouth, it was not me. I want Vivian to know that I kept my word. Everything I left for you was given freely, and I stood by it. Love, Grandma Cornelia. The room was absolutely quiet. Grace was staring at the table. She did not move. She did not speak. She did not cry or argue or defend herself. She did not offer any of the reframings or explanations that had worked for so long. She just sat there, and the weight of Cornelia's voice. Cornelia speaking from beyond death, from a letter written months before the codicil. A letter her daughter did not know existed. A letter that said exactly what my grandmother wanted to say about what had happened, settled over her like something she could not move, could not argue with, could not reframe into something acceptable. The settlement agreement was 12 pages long. It outlined every detail of the restoration, every dollar amount, every asset. I read it carefully. Every paragraph, every condition, every legal term translated into the reality of what it meant for my life. Then I signed it. My signature was nothing special. It's just the practical gesture of a CPA acknowledging numbers and terms. Just my name at the bottom of a legal document in blue ink with today's date. But it was the most powerful thing I had done in 11 weeks. It was not permission I was requesting. It was not an explanation I was offering. It was just the act of signing, the choice to take what belonged to me, the choice to believe that my word mattered, the choice to stop asking for approval and simply claim what had always been mine. Rosa signed below me. Patrick Drummond signed as witness.
The mediator signed, and everything changed. Not because I had won an argument, though I had. Not because my mother had lost, though she had. But because I had finally, after 38 years of extending patience and trust, well past what the evidence supported, believed that my own word mattered more than hers ever would. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to give us more motivation to develop it. Thank you very much. Also, please comment where you're watching our videos. New York or Texas? We are very curious. The probate court issued its formal order on a Tuesday morning in late August. The document arrived by email. Official letterhead, the judge's signature, the seal of the court. $187,000 was restored to my name. The house transferred to me. The savings account with the life insurance payout transferred to me. Everything that had been held in suspended animation by my mother's careful planning was suddenly, officially, irrevocably mine. Rosa called me at work to let me know. I was at my desk at Hartwell and Bridges, looking at a spreadsheet that meant nothing, doing work that felt like moving through water. "It's done," she said. "The order came down. You can access the accounts now. The house is yours. Adiz's bequest is processed separately. You're clear." I had been waiting for this moment for 11 weeks. I had spent $8,200 and untold hours in conference rooms and deposition halls, and my own kitchen at midnight staring at signatures. I had burned through my savings. I had emptied my credit card. I had wagered everything I had built on the possibility that the truth could be extracted from a forged document and a notary's memory. And now it was done. The court had ruled. The paper had been signed. The legal machinery that had ground forward for nearly 3 months had finally resolved. I did not feel the way I thought I would feel. I did not feel vindicated or triumphant. I did not feel the surge of satisfaction I had imagined during the long nights when I was preparing for the settlement. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who had been running on adrenaline and legal strategy for so long. At the moment it stopped, her body simply gave up trying to maintain momentum. My hand shook as I read the email. Not from emotion, from relief so profound. It was almost indistinguishable from grief. "You okay?" my coworker asked. She was looking at me across the partition between our desks. She could see that something had shifted in my face. "My case settled," I said. "It's done." "That's great," she said, and she meant it, but she did not know what it had cost. No one at work knew. I had told them I was dealing with a family matter. I had not said that the family matter involved fraud and betrayal, and a forged document, and 11 weeks of my life spent proving that my own mother had stolen from me. The medical debt was retired the following week. I transferred $38,000 from the restored bequest to the rehabilitation facility that had treated Cornelia, covering the primary balance and the accrued interest and the penalties that had accumulated during the months of the legal battle. Now, the creditor sent me a confirmation letter on Thursday. The debt was satisfied. The lien on my wages was released. I was no longer financially tethered to my grandmother's medical crisis, no longer responsible for the cost of her final months of life. What remained in the account after that was $149,000. Not the full $187,000. Not after Rosa's fees totaling just under $7,000.
Not after Dr. Voss's examination and testimony, adding another 3,000. Not after the credit card debt I would still be paying off for the next 2 years, just to cover the hours I had lost and the professional services I had needed. But enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to feel like I had built something that was mine alone. Something my mother could not touch. Some things that could not be taken or reframed or explained away as evidence of my own selfishness. I did not call my mother. I did not arrange a conversation. I did not attempt any reconciliation or explanation. The probate court order was sufficient. The legal documentation was complete. There was nothing left to say to a person who had decided years ago that the truth was less important than the narrative she preferred. Adias had not spoken to me in 4 months. Not since the week after the codicil reading, when I had shown up at her apartment with copies of Dr. Voss's analysis and the documentation of her own signature on the affidavit, and the evidence that I had not fabricated any of this, that I was not attacking her, that I was defending myself against a fraud, that she had been manipulated into supporting. She had listened while I talked. She had looked at the documents, and then she had said, quietly, "I can't do this, Vivienne. I can't be in the middle of this." She had not answered my calls after that. She had not responded to the text message I sent her after the settlement, explaining that the forensic analysis had proven the codicil was forged, that I had not wanted this outcome, that I understood her position in all of it, and that I was not asking her to choose sides. She had not acknowledged any of it. Our last actual conversation had been at Cornelia's funeral, when she had looked at me across the kitchen and said, "I don't know what you did to make her change her mind, but I know it was something." I had not responded to that. There was nothing to say that would not have sounded like a defense. And I had made a choice long before to stop defending myself to people who had decided my guilt before hearing my side. Grace had told extended family that I had chosen a lawyer over my own mother. She had told people at her book club that I was trying to steal my sister's inheritance. She had told her friends that I had broken up the family over money, and that I had refused to let go of bitterness, and that I was bitter about not being the favourite. And I understood, sitting in my therapist's office during my 3rd session in September, that those narratives would persist forever. That there was nothing I could do or say that would change the story she had chosen to tell. That my victory in court would always be, to her, a betrayal of family loyalty. That she would rewrite history until her version became the accepted family truth. That I was the ungrateful daughter, the money-grabbing granddaughter, the one who had destroyed the family over a technical legal matter that should have stayed private. I accepted this. Not with grace. Not with the kind of spiritual maturity that people who have not lived this would recommend. But with the cold clarity of someone who understands that some relationships are transactional, and that when one party decides the transaction is over, there is nothing left to do but close the account and move forward. The first Friday in September, I drove to Cornelia's house. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The light was already beginning to shift toward gold, the sun lower on the horizon than it would be in the summer, casting longer shadows across the lawn. I had not been there since before the funeral. I had avoided it the way you avoid places that carry too much weight, too much history, too many moments compressed into walls and furniture, and the particular smell of a person's life. The driveway was the same gravel. She had it raked every spring. The sound of the gravel being smoothed a sign that the seasons were changing. The front porch was the same faded grey. The door was locked with the key that Patrick Drummond's office had mailed to me along with all the other documentation of transfer and ownership. I sat in the car for a long time. Just sat there in the driveway with my hands on the steering wheel, looking at the house that my grandmother had paid off alone on a teacher's salary, that she had kept immaculate through 41 years of work and retirement, that she had wanted me to have. The windows reflected the afternoon light. The shutters were painted dark green. The mailbox at the end of the driveway still had her name on it. The letters faded from years of sun and weather. The autumn light was perfect. It was the kind of light that makes everything look like it belongs in a photograph. Like the moment is already nostalgia before it finishes happening. The trees in Cornelia's yard were just beginning to show the first hints of colour change. Green with the faintest edge of amber at the tips of the leaves. In another month, they would be fully transformed. In another month, everything would look different. I got out of the car. I walked to the front door. My hand shook slightly as I turned the key in the lock. Not from fear, but from the strange sensation of stepping into a space that had been preserved exactly as someone left it. A moment frozen in time. The door opened onto the hallway I remembered from 11 years of Sunday visits. The small table where Cornelia kept her keys and her mail. The mirror where she checked her face before leaving the house. The particular smell of her life that was still there in the air, and the furniture and the way light moved through the windows. I did not turn on the lights. I just walked through the house in the golden afternoon light, moving through the spaces where I had sat every Sunday for 11 years. The kitchen with the pale granite counters and the white subway tile backsplash that she had chosen so carefully. The living room with the television and the comfortable chairs and the magazines on the coffee table, some still from June, unread, waiting for hands that would never turn their pages. The bedroom where her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, waiting for eyes that would never read again. I opened the filing cabinet in her study. Everything was still organised exactly as she had left it. Tax returns going back 15 years. Filed in chronological order. Mortgage documents for the house. Now paid off. The final payment made in 1997. Insurance papers. Organised by policy type. Medical records. Documented with the precision of someone who understood that the body and its ailments are also a form of history that should be preserved. This was what she had built. Not just the house or the money or the accounts, but this order, this care, this understanding that documents mattered, that paper trails told the truth when people lied, that the written record was sometimes the only thing worth believing. This was my grandmother's legacy. Not just what she left in money, but what she left in the way she organised her life. I closed the filing cabinet and sat down in her chair. The house was quiet around me. Not the quiet of absence, but the quiet of a life paused, of a space that was waiting for someone to return and resume what had been stopped. My mother had tried to take this. She had tried to rewrite the ending my grandmother had written. She had tried to use a forged signature to tell a lie so profound that it would have echoed for years, that my grandmother had changed her mind, that Cornelia had decided I did not deserve what she had promised,
that some daughter was more worthy of her legacy than another. She had tried to make the institutional machinery of probate court serve her purpose. She had tried to use the law itself as a weapon, but she had made a mistake. She had written the forged codicil in her own handwriting. She had left evidence of her own hand, her own pen, her own decision to commit fraud. She had created a paper trail that led directly back to her, and that evidence had become the lever that opened everything. My mother had left me something, after all. Not the inheritance, not the relationship, but she had left me a document that told me exactly who she was when she thought no one was reading. She had left me the proof of her betrayal, written in her own hand, in the magnolia embossed stationery that Cornelia had ordered in bulk for her 81st birthday. She had left me the thing she thought would destroy me, and instead, that thing had saved me. I am a CPA. I read documents for a living. I understand financial statements and contracts as the way numbers tell stories that people try to hide. I understand that the paper trail is almost always more honest than the person holding the pen. I should have started with my mother's handwriting years ago. I should have understood earlier that the most dangerous lies are the ones someone commits to paper, thinking no one is watching, thinking the document will speak for itself and no one will question it. I should have learned sooner that what people write when they think they are alone is almost always the truth. But I learned it now. And that learning, earned the hard way through 11 weeks of evidence and testimony, and the slow accumulation of proof, was worth everything it cost. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to give us more motivation to develop it. Thank you very much.